All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my esteemed guests. How are you doing tonight, sis?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm well, alhamdulillah. Well, I wanted to just welcome you officially and our audience, inshallah, as they make their way in to season 6 of the Dope Muslim Woman podcast, the Dope Muslim Single Experience. This season, we have heavily focused in on this journey, the single journey. And alhamdulillah, we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of depth. And this one is one that I've just really been looking forward to, and I can't wait to dive in. Most of the topics we've tackled have been well within my scope, but this one I am definitely a student today, so I'm super humbled. Again, welcome to the Dope Muslim Woman podcast. As you make it in, guys, you know what we do here. Please drop your salams. We always want to start from that place of barakah, the exchange of peace. So assalamu alaikum to everybody who is joining. We ask that you give your salams. Wa alaikum salam, Sister Sophia. Thank you for starting it off for us and share the podcast. So this is a great time to just go ahead and share it. We want this message out. So alhamdulillah, the name of this podcast, and myself and my esteemed guest who I'm about to introduce, we went back and forth about the topic, mainly because when I get really fascinated about something, I don't know. My mind starts to just go, and so I couldn't like really kind of narrow down this topic. But it's just like when I put it out there, Chantel, so many people were like, "I really need to hear this." So we are talking about the effects of celibacy, long-term celibacy, right? Long-term celibacy, and the power of pleasure, fertility in the womb. We're going to cover a lot tonight. Wa alaikum salam, everybody. It's so good to see you guys. Welcome. So it's my pleasure and honor to welcome our esteemed guests here tonight as we dive in. I first have to start this off personal before I go into our official bio, but I've known Chantel, I want to say pushing 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both very young. But mashallah, I was teasing Chantel before we went live. Like she looks exactly the same. Alhamdulillah. That's the beautiful barakah that comes with her. But she always was a beautiful person, and she always was really passionate about health and well-being and the environment. And it's beautiful to see that she has come to this beautiful place. But her name is Chantel Blake, and she's a womb wellness educator and a womb steaming therapist with a professional background in nursing and environmental engineering. She weaves the fields of medicine, environmentalism, and holistic self-care into fascinating and practical instruction for women of all ages. Since 2019, Chantel has helped hundreds of women experience healthier periods and greater allyship with their female bodies through consultations, courses, and coaching on her online platform, Honored Womb. Her work continues to reach an ever growing audience through published articles, podcast interviews, and speaking engagements. As a world traveler and serial expat, she has learned how to communicate her heartfelt desire to see women flourishing in their female design across cultures, contexts, and languages. And as a mother, she is extremely passionate about nurturing an intergenerational legacy of women who love their periods, honor their wombs, and protect their fertility for generations to come. You can learn more about Chantel's work at www.honoredwomb.com, and we'll put that on the screen for you guys shortly. So, welcome, Chantel. Welcome to the Dope Muslim Woman podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, season 6. Like, congratulations, mashallah. You've been at it.
MashaAllah. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah. Well, it's my honor to have you here, and we're going to just get right into this topic. I told you that I think I was sharing with Chantel, and I want to share, kind of privy the audience to some of our conversation that, I've been diving into this conversation around the single epidemic. And one of the things that was fascinating to me, Chantel, is that we're now in an age where the number of single or unpartnered people outnumber the amount of married people. And in fact, like since COVID, since the pandemic, there's been a huge rise in individuals who are unpartnered, not engaged in any type of sexual activity, definitely not married. And so we definitely are seeing starking numbers and some really serious changes, at least here in the States. And there's been a lot of conversations amongst Muslims as it relates to, hey, do I want to stay single? Do I want to stay married? And there's just a lot of dialogue. But one of the things that is happening for sure that we know that there are less babies being born. And we wanted to just kind of talk about the relationship of the womb, and just this kind of break this whole concept down. I wanted to first start with some understanding because I think you're going to have to walk us through, Chantel. First,
Okay.
can you help when we say the womb? Can you really define that for us so we know what we're talking about here tonight?
So, anatomically, like just from a physical perspective, most of the time when we talk about the womb, we're talking about the uterus, right? And its attached anatomy, right? The uterus is connected to ovaries. There are uterine tubes, also known as fallopian tubes. But in some cultures, the womb has a greater significance. It's also considered the second heart, right? It's a
Oh,
place where the emotions that we feel can be manifested in a real physical way. And if you're a woman and you've ever experienced a period shift when you were grieving or anxious, a period coming very early when there's a lot of stress and excitement, or delayed when there's loss, when there's sadness, when there's grief. And so in some traditional cultures, they also see the womb as the second heart, right? This
mm,
second place to store emotion, right? When the overwhelm of emotion in the heart, when there's like no capacity in the heart to really process some of the things that we feel, that the womb is the second place to store those emotions. In some cultures, the womb is considered the compass, right? When it's in balance,
mm,
then a woman is in balance. When it's out of balance, then there are imbalances, and that can be very physical in terms of hormonal imbalances as well as energetically, not feeling centered, right?
mm.
Some cultures put a lot of emphasis on the uterus actually being centered in the pelvic space. And then for women there are some women who are born without uteruses. They may have some anatomy, but not the uterus itself, or some women have their uterus removed. And in that way, we would still describe the womb as that pelvic space, that center of creativity, right? That central, that energetic home of where we can give birth to ideas, obviously
Okay.
give birth to children as well. So generally, we're talking about the pelvic space, the uterus, and where it is or where it was in the case of women who've had hysterectomies.
Got it. So I one of the things I was like radically Googling and looking up books for is this concept of womb healing. So, I don't know. I don't know if I really got a good definition for it with my research. How would you define this concept of womb healing?
Yeah, there's different levels to it, right? So on one level, we could talk about womb issues being healed, whether those issues are fibroids, cysts, polycystic ovarian syndrome, difficult periods, cramping, clotting, missing periods. So that's like on one level of it, it's just the actual issues connected to the womb being resolved or healed through whatever, methodologies, modalities that people use, whether they're natural or supported by medical intervention, I guess. But on another level, womb healing can also express how we restore a healthy connection with the womb and everything that's attached to it. So, for example, when women have really negative associations with the womb, maybe negative associations with their period shame, period pain, or if they've experienced some type of boundary violation that resulted
Mm,
in trauma connected to the womb and the womb space, then that level of healing is a little bit different, right? This is about really restoring a healthy connection with the body, with the self, and with the womb space in particular. Because sometimes when women associate either shame or pain with
okay.
their womb, right,
Okay.
whether through the periods, whether through some violent act or what have you, there is a residue that remains in the body where that persists as this hateful relationship towards this source of your burden, right? If you have a difficult period and it's like, oh, that's just a woman's burden, that can, on another layer, that can lead to a certain amount of hatred for a part of yourself, right? Because this is a part of your anatomy, it's a part of your being. So on that level, womb healing is more about this emotional repair and sometimes psychological repair, right? Actually working through some of the negative associations and imprints that we received consciously and subconsciously with femininity, having a womb, having a
Mm,
uterus, having female
mhm.
anatomy.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, we're gonna circle back to that, but I wanted to jump right in. So, okay, so the concept of long-term celibacy, Chantel, and we are going to define that. And I mean, like abstinence. Obviously, if a Muslim woman or man is unmarried, they are they should be inshallah refraining from any type of sexual activity, in that space. And so
Mm-hmm.
some people and personal people have reached out to me and said, I've been celibate or I've been without physical touch 10 plus years or 15 plus years, sometimes 20 plus years. So I really want to kind of understand what are some of the effects of long-term celibacy on our bodies, on the womb, and like, how does it really impact us? What's
Mm-hmm.
that relationship there? Because I don't know if we fully understand, some of the other implications that come with our sensuality and sexuality.
Exactly. I mean, our sexual health is a part of our health, right? And
Yeah.
any part of our body that's not in use loses function, loses, we'll talk about atrophy. For example, if you have a part of your body, you can have atrophy of your muscle. Atrophy is when you're actually losing tissue, right? Because
Okay.
it's not being used and it's literally wasting away. And the same can happen with our sexual anatomy, right? When certain parts of our body are not in use, there's not circulation, engorgement, activity happening in certain parts of our body, then over time, those parts of the body can wear away, can thin out, can literally dry out. So in the female body, what that could look like is clitoral atrophy, where the actual clitoris shrinks in size, loses like uh, tone and like presence, where it's hard to find. That can also happen to the vaginal
Like
walls.
physically, a physical withdrawal of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
where you can't find it or it's harder to find. It's like shrinking or, drying out in size, which sounds really odd, but, like basically, being harder to find, harder to locate, and not taking up as much space as it previously did. The same can happen to the vaginal walls, where they can become thin and dry as well. And so essentially, and the same with the vulva, the labia, right? So you have literally parts of your body that, if there aren't other ways that you're encouraging circulation in your body, whether it's through exercise or
Mm.
warm baths or a steaming practice, like things that very intentionally protect the integrity of your tissues, right? Your clitoral
Um,
tissues, your vaginal tissues, your vulva, your labia, then that's a possible physical effect, that your anatomy may not be available for function if you become sexually active at a later point in time, right? You get what
so
I'm saying?
yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to insert and ask a question. So how is there a time limit where you start to see that happen? I'm just wondering, is there a particular 10 years, 15 years, or is it
It's there are other factors at play too. So it's
okay?
hard to really map that out, because some people maintain a healthy relationship with their sexual health just through activity, through, like I said, being mindful and aware. Even something as simple as actually looking at your anatomy on a regular basis to say, hey, what's going on? Is everything present? Is everything changing? Is anything changing? Is the color of my tissue still showing that there's healthy blood flow? Is the presence of all my parts, is everything okay? Is anything shrinking in size, changing? Are there any moles, any rashes? Like, just even for your overall health,
Right.
having a regular practice of checking in with, what does your vulva look like? What does your anatomy look like, to make sure everything is okay? And so it depends how that personal I think on how that person is experiencing health and robustness in their body overall. Like if a person is active and generally has physical
Right.
activity, they're moving, they attend saunas, they do things that stimulate and vitalize the body in all of those senses. Then it may not be a similar trajectory versus someone
Okay.
who's very sedentary, who doesn't have a relationship with either physical activity or even sensation, sensuality,
Mm,
pleasure as a whole, right? Some of the
mm,
things that allow us to feel enlivened are the things that feel good to us, right? The things that give us joy, the things that give us pleasure, and even non-sexual ways as well, right?
right. Right.
So for different people, it could be a different process altogether. It depends on what your relationship with your body is like and your relationship with just overall health, vitality, and fitness. What are you eating? Right?
Mm,
How are you caring for yourself? What's your self esteem like? What's your level of self care and self love? I think those would definitely have an impact. Also, age is a factor. Some things that happen as we get older, as we get closer to our menopausal years, is that we might be making less, we generally are going to start making less estrogen at some point, less testosterone. And so that can have a relationship with, this atrophy that happens, this loss of tissue, this loss of function, loss of sensation that can happen with sexual inactivity over the long term.
over the long term. So, okay. So, I mean, now I have a lot of questions. Um,
Well,
okay. So this is interesting, especially when you talk about with women, because we have this conversation, and I know we have to do this really gracefully. But that's even the interesting part about it, because when I put the topic out, there were a lot of women that were like, "Oh, great, I want to hear it," and there were some brothers like, "Oh, be careful how you talk about that," right?
mm,
And so it's sort of this relationship with shame that a lot of
mm,
women have as it relates to sensuality, sexuality, and pleasure, where even as culturally, many cultures, and even with some of us, don't even associate, the female body as experience and pleasure.
mm.
Can we talk a little bit about why that is important? Like just from a very almost biological, physiological lens, the idea of pleasure. Why
Yeah.
is that really vital?
One thing that's really important about pleasure, it's an indication of safety, right? You don't play and feel good when you're not safe. And
Mm,
and one of the things, so it's interesting because you need to feel safe to experience pleasure, right?
right.
But experiencing pleasure is also a way that we communicate safety. So it's a bit of a loop, you know?
Hmm.
So when you feel safe, you have the capacity to experience pleasure. And when you feel pleasure, you communicate to your nervous system, like to your whole being, that, oh, I'm safe. I'm not living under threat.
Wow.
And that's why in our kind of pre conversation, I was sharing with you that just because people there is celibacy is one thing, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that for people who are intentionally choosing celibacy, or because they're not married, and protecting their chastity, like that's something praiseworthy, right? But that doesn't mean that this is there's no other way to experience vitality, pleasure, and like liveliness in the body. But I also want to acknowledge that yeah, pleasure is one of the ways that we communicate safety to our bodies, and pleasure is also one of the ways that we relieve stress. Right? This is how we literally
Mm,
flush cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Like we flush it out of our bodies when we experience pleasure. The peak of that flushing out of cortisol, is definitely going to be climax or orgasm, but other levels of that have a similar effect. And what happens when we have less cortisol and stress hormones circulating in our body? We allow other hormones. We communicate safety again, right? We tell our
yeah.
ovaries that you're safe. If you want to bring forth new life, there's
Mm,
enough safety in the environment to do so. So that's one way that it's communicated. We also, there's something interesting that happens when we sustain high levels of stress. When we sustain high levels of stress, some of our hormones are not able to really achieve a balanced ratio. So, estrogen
Okay.
and progesterone, in particular, are like the key female reproductive hormones. And when we're under a lot of stress, progesterone really is not able to reach the levels that it should to keep estrogen and progesterone in a healthy balance. What
Hmm.
happens when we have too much estrogen? That's when we tend to see a lot of the common reproductive issues that many women are facing, whether it's really heavy, clotty periods, whether it's fibroids and cysts and what have you. So, on another very physiologic level, when we experience various levels of pleasure, right? Like I said, not only sexual pleasure, when we experience various levels of pleasure, as well as activities like exercise, relaxation, and meditation, we literally bring down those stress levels. And when we do that, other hormonal levels are able to really flourish and thrive and be
Mm.
produced at healthier levels is like the easiest way to explain it.
Yeah, I get it. So basically, you're saying that, it's vital for us to be able to experience that so that we can have some sort of like homeostasis balance in our
Hmm.
bodies so that we
Yeah.
can be in a receiving space, whether we
Hmm.
are receiving to produce life or creating as women should, or just even this aspect of like just harnessing our femininity,
Hmm.
right? It has a lot to do, it's all connected. Is that what
Yeah.
I'm understanding you
Yep.
say?
Yeah, yeah. There's a physiologic impact, and so like when I was referring to our kind of earlier conversation, that just because women are married doesn't mean that they're experiencing pleasure, and we have to get clear on that too. So don't think, oh, I'm married, so this is not my conversation. Is there pleasure? Is there safety in your
Mm,
relationship? Is there pleasure in your life and within your marital intimacy? That's another level too. So I think that's something that also needs to be addressed. You're also not fully accessing the full range of your feminine wellness when you don't experience, safety, pleasure, and in your life, whether you're married or not. I guess that's kind of how I want to kind of summarize that part.
okay.
Yeah.
So for individuals who may not be experiencing, like you said, that peak, which is like the orgasm that the woman experiences, what are some other ways she can experience pleasure in the body? That's
Yeah.
sort of interesting.
Finding things. So obviously, we're talking about things that generally feel good to the body. And so some people use pleasure as like a code for self-pleasuring or masturbation, and that's not the only,
Yeah, that's
that's
what comes up. If you
that's what
Google this,
people that's
that's
what
all
comes
that
up.
comes up.
And it's interesting too, because there were a couple of years ago that I was really curious as like what kind of information is in circulation. And in the
Right.
non-Muslim, like if you check non-Muslim sources in the secular world, the answer to every problem is
I
masturbation. It's
know.
just like, you're like, how do I build self-esteem, or how do I have a better relationship
Self-pleasure.
with my partner? Like, it'll, even for partnered married people. And that's like, oh, that's going to fix all of your problems. Now there's a whole conversation coming with like money. You want more money in your life? You want more financial abundance? Then this is how you achieve it. And so obviously it's not a conversation that is really relevant to a Muslim audience. Um,
Right.
and really speaks to all of our values. However, the other ways, like just to get back to that point, the other ways that we can experience pleasure, meaning something that feels good to you, is, being engaged with your senses, being present with the things that your senses experience. So, you can put on fragrances, or you can have a fragrant home, you can wear beautiful things, but beautiful clothing, beautiful attire. You can even live in a gorgeous landscape, but are you present enough with those experiences to really like draw them in, to really like
Mm,
take in the enjoyment of how good that fruit tastes, or how
yeah.
earthy that cup of tea is on your palate, or how beautiful the shades of a
Yeah.
sunset is. You know what I mean? So there's like, you can go through life, but you can really be present and really savor. I think it's savoring. the things that we experience, whether it's really
Mm,
savoring food, really savoring sights, contact with other people, connection. Pleasure is not code for sex. Like pleasure we experience and we can experience and we should be experiencing things that delight our senses all throughout our life, right? And it's not just relegated to you turn on a switch and that's where pleasure exists, like in one space. Like that's how we keep in relationship with the liveliness of life, like the vitality of being
yeah,
alive.
right. Well, Chantel, you brought up something that I do have a big concern with, which is this really rising trend of masturbation and self pleasure as almost like an alternative
Mm,
towards marriage and relationships with other people.
mm-hmm,
And I'm deeply concerned about this primarily because of our youth. A lot of the
mm,
young people are saying, "I don't want to get married," and they are engaged in a lot of pornography and all kinds of
mm,
things.
mm,
'Cause some of the things I deal with in my work. Um, so I really want to better like sort of understand this. And I know, like, I don't want to get into the Islamic point. I don't want to open up a can of worms with you, Chantel.
yeah.
But I mean, have you looked into sort for far as like the damage that sort of causes, especially if people are using it as a replacement? I mean, I've
Mm,
literally heard people say, "Don't worry about it getting a husband, get a vibrator." Like that is not that is kind of almost a common theme, and
mm,
that's amongst Muslim women or a brother
mm,
saying, "I don't even know why I want to be bothered with this. I'll take care of myself." Right?
mm,
I just want to speak about like why is that really damaging to the way really Allah designed us to really experience pleasure, and even when we think about us as women, our wombs and what needs to be cultivated there and the
mm.
purpose of
Yeah, it's really sad to hear that that's what people are reducing marriage and marital intimacy too, right? Marital intimacy is an act of worship. It's a means of connection. It's this way that we're able to really bring in, just to build community, right? Community starts, this is like the core of it. So it's really sad that people are reducing the idea of marriage to fulfilling a sexual need, you know? Um, Obviously it's so much more than that, and even when you take procreation off of the table, it's still a way
it.
that spirits are connected to one another, right?
Mhm.
That you get to have this reward of charity by being sexually available to your spouse. So that's really sad that that's what people are reducing marriage to, because it's so much more. It is a spiritual, intimacy and connection is whole. It's the spiritual coming together as well, not just the physical. So I think, like you said, pornography in particular, it just really um, puts forth a really false notion, a really distorted and degrading notion of like the beauty that is marital intimacy. So I think it also, at least for females, I think it would be helpful for them to not to be aware of the function that libido and sex drive supports. Like this is part of our design, and especially when we're ovulating, we're going to experience
Okay.
more ideally, right? If our hormones, ideally, when we're around the time that we're ovulating, if you think about it, like, okay, you're releasing an egg, there are certain hormones that are shifting that drive us towards connection, and they drive us towards being connected with another person. So it's a time where generally women will feel more social, and they'll be wanting to feel more connected to other people. It's a time where literally your skin changes, your scent and your ability to perceive the scent of others. Like the design of keeping humanity
Mm.
alive is very intricate and is very scientific. Um, but I think it would help women to understand their menstrual cycle so you can anticipate, like, look, there are going to be times of the month where my biology is going to be priming me more towards, procreation than other times. So, how do I manage that? How do I plan for that? What do I
Mm.
do during those times? Those are great days to fast. So, if you're if you have a sunnah fasting practice, that's a great time to be fasting because it's a time when your metabolism is lower. You can manage fasting easier, more than likely. Like you should have less hunger cravings, but on the other side, your desire will likely be higher. So it's a way to really have a plan around how you're going to be in relationship and with your libido and respond to what's your natural biology. Like this is just what's happening. So I think it would help women to get in tune with their menstrual cycles and kind of plan for, okay, this is what I need to avoid and this is what I need to incline towards. Maybe I need to do those really intense workouts and hikes
Ah,
while I'm in this stage so I can flush that cortisol and redirect that energy in a more productive way than sitting at home watching romance flicks and
mm.
listening to 90s R&B. Like maybe that's not the recipe right now.
That's so interesting. Okay, so Chantel, I need you to do me a favor. I'm mashallah because
Okay.
you are brilliant naturally, alhamdulillah. But
Um,
I need you to simplify this concept because this is
Okay.
really good. I remember I had a group of single friends, and there was this event that it was going to be hosted. I don't know what it was. It was something. It was something where the potential of man female dynamic was there. I forget what the program was. I don't know if it was some
Mhm.
type of poetry event. It was something. And I remember going and say, "Hey, you coming out to the event? Are you going to such and such?" And I remember she said, "No." She said, "It's certain times during the month where I'm very careful of the places I go and the people I'm around and what I listen to, what I hear." And I was just kind of like, "Oh." So I want you to make this plain, okay? So you're saying that obviously there is times, and we chart this by our menstrual cycle, by our periods, where we are more um, sexually ready and available, and we're desiring partnering. So for the person who is unmarried, it's important to be conscious of that.
Mhm.
Okay, so tell me how we can find that out when that time is. Break this down for us.
Break it down. Okay, so our entire menstrual cycle, we would count it from how many days it takes to go from the first day of one period to the first day of the next period.
Mm-hmm.
So an average menstrual cycle might be around 29 days long, right? So you
Okay.
have a period, and then after 29 days, another period would start. However, some women have shorter or longer menstrual cycles. So traditionally, people would say, oh, women ovulate on day 14.
Okay.
Counting day one as the first day of your period. And then if you count through, day 14 would be about mid cycle. So generally, we ovulate mid cycle.
Okay.
However, if you have irregular periods or if your menstrual cycles tend to be shorter or longer, it's not going to be a perfect day 14. So, generally speaking, we notice that we are approaching ovulation by a couple of key signs.
Okay. Let me
Um,
write this down.
Write it down, right? A
Write it
couple
down,
of
ladies.
key signs, yeah. A couple of key signs. So one, there generally you start to see like a rise in energy and a desire to be social and connected. You might notice that you're not really affected if you skip a meal. You won't really get hungry. You can kind of get by with a light meal because your
Really?
metabolism is actually lower at this time.
Oh.
So your caloric needs, how many calories you need to eat in a day, is actually slightly lower than later in the month.
So hold on. So until does that mean you're not as hungry? That equates to being not as hungry, or just that you can get by longer without meals?
It could be both, right? You might
Okay.
notice that you have a lower appetite, but
Oh.
it also can mean that if you were not vigilant about having regular meals, you might be able to function without getting real hangry or irritable very easily. The other key way that we notice when we're observing ovulation is the change in our cervical mucus, right? Some people will say their vaginal discharge. So essentially, when women produce very stretchy, clear, slippery, more abundant, more watery cervical mucus, That's how the body prepares for conception, right? That's the quality of cervical mucus that's needed to keep sperm alive long enough for. So this is about to be a whole science lesson,
I
but
know, girl.
that's the kind of mucus that's the kind of cervical mucus that nourishes sperm and weeds out like dysfunctional or deformed sperm. This
Mm.
is the kind of cervical mucus that keeps sperm alive long enough to reach ovulation, the time of ovulation, right? So we know that women only ovulate one day of the month. The egg is only present 12 to 24 hours, and then the egg
Mhm.
is gone. However, this cervical mucus can keep sperm alive for up to 5 days. So when you see that change in your cervical mucus, more watery, clear, stretchy, like egg white, that is an indicator that you're approaching your ovulatory phase or your time of ovulation. What would be another indicator?
So what about this, Chantel? She said it seems during that time is recognizable by others. Is that true? I always wonder that. Can men kind of sense when you, because they, some people get approached more time,
Yes, yes, other people can perceive it too. That's what we call, girl. This is Mother Nature. Mother Nature is out here trying
girl.
to
Okay.
trying to keep the human
That
race
explains a
alive.
lot.
Okay, trying to keep the human race alive. So yes, some men can say that they do perceive when their partner is ovulating, because we have pheromones that there's ways that we can actually perceive hormones, like with the scent, right? The scents that people give off. Um, so yeah, sometimes other people can notice when we're ovulating. We might also notice that our skin is clearer. Actually, your pore size changes when you're ovulating. The skin might be real glowy and balmy because you have rising estrogen levels. So those are some of the things we see. Overall, just more energy and like drive to get things done. And we get a little like a little bit of testosterone. Women produce a small amount of testosterone as well before we ovulate. And if you might feel like, yeah, I can like really have drive to get my projects done or to get up and go or stick to my fitness routine, or, when you feel like that drive, that tends to also really peak around the ovulatory phase, that ovulation window as well. So the sister that you're talking about, that's really wise to be vigilant, know what you need to be doing and not be doing at a time when your biology is going to be like driving you towards partnership. And if that's not your goal, and if that's not the right container and context for it, then you have to really be vigilant and mindful of who you're with,
Yeah.
what hours of the night you out, like what company you're keeping, what are you listening to, what are you feeding yourself. These are all really, what are you consuming in terms of media is a big, big factor too. So,
Dang. Wow,
yeah.
Chantel, that is powerful. I have a question from the
Hmm.
audience. Sister Malika said, "What about for us women that are post-menopause without periods? Does this
Hmm.
apply the same, or does it
So,
change?"
so no, when we no longer have periods, then we're not going to have that same cyclical hormonal pattern. We're not ovulating anymore, so there's not going to be that, right? So menopause is defined as, you've gone a complete year, a complete calendar year with no period, and then it just continues with you. Sometimes women will have some type of spotting, but a year without a period is generally the indicator that you're in menopause, your menstruation has ceased. And so in that sense, no, you're not going to see those signs of ovulation because you're not ovulating anymore, and you're not going to have a monthly hormonal cycle. You'll have other ways to kind of leverage, if you're trying to kind of leverage your energy and your overall sexual health. Is probably gonna You'll have to kind of access other practices. You're not going to be able to rely on your hormones alone to drive you towards intimacy. You would have to have some other tools, I guess, for lack of a better word.
So, is there an explanation for some of the women who hit menopause and then they say their sexual drive goes through the roof? Is that
I mean, I've heard that too. It's not related to ovulation. I mean, sometimes women are approaching menopause, so there is something that happens before we've actually gotten to the other side when we're not menstruating it anymore. So there are like, especially women like after 40,
Right.
your body knows that the time is running out, like eggs are
Oh,
on a clock. So sometimes you actually will ovulate two eggs at a time at a certain,
oh,
like when you're getting to the end of your menstruating years.
yeah.
Sometimes the body is like, this is our last chance. So, like we
Wow.
gotta, this is our chance. And then other times people also say that there is a shift that happens as we get older, in just that our self-acceptance and our clarity on boundaries and what we want and what we don't want gets just a lot clearer. We know ourselves and we're not taking any
That-
subpar nonsense anymore, exactly. um,
yes.
and so some say that's another part of it too. That's another reason why women are just more in touch with who they are and clear about who they want to be with and what they want to be doing in their life. So yeah, there are some shifts there. So there is a window before actual menopause where, yeah, libido. But then again, it depends on
The person and
what
yeah.
the person. Yeah, if a person already has a healthy sexual life, then there's no reason why that wouldn't continue even after menopause.
Okay, see now I got questions. So is there some like predetermining factors? You know, how some women have a very high libido, like you said, a
Hmm.
healthy kind of sexual life or healthy sense of sensuality, sexuality, and other women like have like no libido. And
Hmm.
like it's just is this has anything to do with what you just mentioned, far as like boundaries and the comfort with themselves, or is this just a purely physiological thing, or a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of a couple of things because, on one level, like sometimes women are not making enough of certain hormones, right? So sometimes women have really low testosterone, for example, that sometimes has a correlation with low libido. Sometimes there are yeah, sometimes there's hormonal factors. Another thing that I notice, a lot of women, I don't hear it being spoken about, but sometimes women are not enjoying the sex that they are having, and so that's a reason why there's no interest, because it's not pleasurable or it's painful. There is actual pain and discomfort that they're enduring if they're partnered. But if a person who's single, it's hard to say. If a person's not married and they're experiencing low libido, sometimes, I don't know, the mind can be quite powerful when you're just like, this, I don't have access to this right now. So there is a hormonal component that could be there. There could be a bit of a psychological component, like I'm not available for that. So it's not even there for me. But just some, just individuals, some people in general, they just have greater access to their sexuality, their sense of self, and they do have a higher libido. But I think it's just important to not think of libido as like this cherry on top kind of thing. It's just
Okay.
it's a function of the endocrine system, right? In the female body, if the endocrine system and the hormones, everything is working, we should see regular periods. We should see fairly effortless fertility if partnered, and we should see libido. It just means that the systems are working, all systems go. I think it's important to just see it as a function of health and not like this extra special treat that only some women get,
Right.
you know
I
but
see.
we
That's
also
so important to say.
but we have to talk about stress, we have to talk about lifestyle.
Okay.
Libido is very intricate because if you're in a high stress environment, if you're in a very demanding role, wherever that is, in the home, outside of the home, whatever, stress is going to dampen any kind of libido. And again, back to safety, lack of safety in a relationship is going to dampen libido anyway.
Okay, so that brings me to a point. So, like I said, doing my little dive on people that are involved in different type of womb healing exercises, I noticed that there was a lot of conversations around women who had painful or traumatic, unsafe relationships in the
Mm-hmm.
past. Like I said, that relationship that's relative to their wombs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, women I have experienced many violations. I wanted to ask more so about the relationship between the womb and that trauma, and how can a woman use her womb to heal some of that? Because from
Hmm.
my understanding, some of that pain is stored in the womb. Am I okay?
Yeah.
Break it down for us.
I mean, on a, obviously the sometimes the easiest way to probably explain it, well, yes, our cells store, there's memory stored in our cells. And so, on a very easy to explain way, sometimes there's a result of a violation, right? Or sometimes a violation leaves some kind of imprint on the body. And that imprint could be some kind of scar tissue that was formed. Scar tissue, especially, can be really difficult. Like if you've had some kind of injury, tear, or what have you, sometimes there's scar tissue that doesn't necessarily soften. It can really actually store the charge of how that scar was created. And until you start to let go or unwind the emotions that were connected to that scar being formed, sometimes the tissue literally won't dissolve. So let's
Wow.
look at another example. If you've had a C-section,
Yes.
so you have a scar after C-section. For some women, that scar, it heals, the tissue dissolves. There's no hardness, there's no like firmness or tightness in where that scar was. But sometimes what we find is that it doesn't matter what you do topically,
Yeah.
massaging or what have you, until you start to release the emotions that were attached to how you felt about that C-section or during that C-section. Until you release the emotion, that's when the tissue starts to dissolve, if that makes sense.
Wow.
Right. So, similarly, if there was a violation and there's some scarring, if you have scar tissue creating tightness and pain in the body, sometimes we have to deal with the emotion attached to it before we can release that. And that scar tissue can show up as pain. It can show up as pain in the period. It can show up as infections. This is another way that sometimes violations kind of linger in the body. It's almost like the body's way of putting up its own boundary, like, no, this is not happening. And so sometimes we see that with women having recurring infections. And until you start to treat the infections, then we start to like distance the body from that experience, like make a little bit of space. There's another way that it can sometimes show up in painful intercourse as well, or painful periods. Some women have only started their path of painful periods after a type of trauma or
Wow.
violation has happened. And so
Mm.
sometimes that healing can happen through therapy. That's one way that healing can happen. But sometimes it needs to be a physical form of therapy or a somatic form of therapy where there's actually um, a new pattern of sensation that can help to resolve, like distance ourselves from what has happened before. So, for example, when the I studied vaginal steaming under Kelly Garza, who's the founder of the Peristeam Hydrotherapy Institute.
I'm gonna ask you about that in a minute,
Yes.
but go ahead.
And she actually, so one thing that we are noticing and also tracking with clients is that steaming tends to be a way that we can address the physiologic residue of a trauma, but at the same time unwind some of the emotions that were present and the pain that was present when that trauma happened. So
Okay.
imagine if a person has experienced some type of violation and then they no longer have sensation or they experience pain. Sometimes steam is a gentle way to reintroduce sensation to them in a way that they control. No one's
Mhm.
doing something to them. They are finding a way to reintroduce positive and gentle sensation to their own body. And that's one way that they kind of reclaim and release some of that pain, but also reclaim that this is my space, right? This is my
Wow.
body, and I get to choose how I'm going to be cared for in this way. We've also seen scar tissue dissolve with steaming. So women who've actually had scar tissue, and I'm also going to add birth trauma is, and I know this is the single experience, but just to put it out there that sometimes women who have had birth trauma, sometimes steaming also helps to kind of let go of whatever that pain or that incident, that violation was, that's leaving its residue in the body, whether it's scar tissue, whether it's painful
Mm,
periods, whether it's painful intercourse, etc. um,
mm.
and
It's
then
amazing.
there's other practices have to do with expression, right?
Yeah.
When we
Release.
hold in what we want to say and express, there's a real tension that happens in the pelvis, right? And that tension and that tightening can become a pattern that creates pain as well. So yeah, there's definitely a couple of ways that we can approach womb trauma.
Yeah.
Um,
That's really, really deep. I wanted to ask you about some of this. So I've heard people share, like, okay, when they were with or their experience with a very unhealthy in an unhealthy relationship or with a really unsafe partner, that they experience, physical things as it relates to like BVs. And I don't know. I heard some people say, oh, BVs is a sign that they're cheating, or I don't know, which is.
mhm.
And do you have any knowing about that, or as it relates to some of the things that could maybe occur in the sexual relationship with an unsafe
Mm.
partner? Because that's one of the things I heard come up is like these sort of all these sort of vaginal issues that occur when it's not safe and it's not aligned.
That can. It definitely can. I mean, there could be other ways that infections manifest as well, but oftentimes when there's a lack of safety, there's not really full consent, right? Or there might be kind of forced consent in a way where you're saying yes, but your body is actually saying no. Your body is not open, aroused, prepared to receive. And so sometimes just that forced entry, even if you consent to the forced entry, but still that's something that can actually affect the vaginal walls, like on a physiologic level. That's something that comes to mind. There are certain emotions that are attached with recurring infections. So um, we think of infections as like, okay, what's the culprit? Is it a bacteria? Is it a yeast? Is it a virus? What's going on? And that's one side of it. But there's also an energetic pattern that's connected to infections, and infections tend to be strongly correlated with this feeling of resentment, like holding in
Mm,
anger and not
mm.
expressing oneself. um, and so some people might be like, well, how are you connecting emotions and this infection? But I didn't even think. I was like, this sounds kind of out there, a little bit woo woo.
Yeah.
But when I started working with clients, I was like, wait, hold on, these
Right.
dots are connecting. Do you see what I see? Because am I
Right.
seeing this? And they're like, no, that's me. You're
Right.
nailing it on the head. Yep, I am. There is resentment in my relationship. There is resentment. There is this like something that I can't get out, and it's eating me up inside. And sometimes that manifests as an infection of different types. And then there's other things that if you're not fully safe, you may not be telling your partner like, look, I need you to take a shower before we have a rendezvous here. And so there's that element of it. If there's a lack of congruency on lifestyle, if the partner's lifestyle and your lifestyle is really not congruent, then that's an element that could be disruptive to your ecosystem, because the vagina has its own flora, its own pH, it's its own ecosystem. And so
Yeah.
we have to be very vigilant about partnership.
Yes, ma'am. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Someone asked, can the steaming help a circumcised woman?
Help her well, if it can help her with menstrual issues, yes, but if it's about sensation, it could be helpful. If there's an issue around painful intercourse or lack of sensation with intercourse, yes, it can be helpful, because you're increasing blood flow. Anytime you increase blood flow, you're also increasing sensation, you're also creating suppleness and like softness, and you know what I mean, like, so it could be helpful. It would depend on what aspect of what effect the circumcision is having on the individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, there was a question about could that contribute to miscarriages and fibroids? I'm assuming what you're speaking about. Maybe if you guys can clarify exactly was spoken about, but I think it was the point as it relates to
The lack
like
of
the partnership.
safety
Yeah.
that can contribute to. Very possible. It's something that, we kind of forget, is that like your eggs are already with you. And like, um there are many reasons. Miscarriage is not always an exact, like, good relationship equals this bad. Obviously
Yeah, yeah,
Allah will
yeah.
bring forth life in all kinds of
Yep.
circumstances, and with his wisdom. But fertility challenges, if there could be a connection with a lack of safety, yes, that's very
Trauma and
possible.
stress, she said. She said trauma and stress. Could that
Oh yeah.
relate to, yeah,
Yes, yeah, definitely.
fibroids? I know
Mhm.
fibroids has a correlation with that. A
Yes,
lot of women are
yeah,
experiencing that.
especially Black women. Yep,
Yep.
there's a correlation between experiencing racism and fibroids. Like, that's a whole nother,
Mm.
living under the stress of racism and how that manifests in different ways. Our hair care girl, this is about to be a whole nother season, because our hair care products
Oh,
and how that affects our health. There was just an article published recently about relaxers, and the FDA doesn't approve hair care products, and so whatever goes on your scalp is going in your bloodstream, and the connection that's happening with fibroids, and lawsuits around really going after these hair care industries that conceal or don't
wow.
test to see the effect that their products are having on bodies, especially Black women's bodies. So yeah,
Mm.
it's all interconnected, and I think the medical model definitely tends to, like, put one thing in a box. Like, you have this one thing, but you are part of an ecosystem of effects, right? You can't take away your social experience, your societal experience, your community experience from what you're physically experiencing inside of yourself. So
Yeah,
that's right.
beautiful. One of the other questions is, and we are getting to the end, so I'm going to take some questions. But what's the psychological effects of being celibate, not by choice, but because of not being married?
Mm.
That emotional component that relates to long-term celibacy.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what would be the long-term effect, but I'm imagining that individual is going to need to resource their own sense of validation and their own sense of, like, affirmation. Sometimes we do things for a partner, right? We take care of ourselves for a partner, or we check up on certain things, or we show up in a certain way when there's someone else in our life. But I think it's really important that we're aware of how we're showing up for ourselves, right? How we're caring for ourselves. And one thing we were talking about before is that periods, right? We don't talk about periods unless we're trying to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy. And
Right,
if you're and
right,
if you're in neither stage, right? If you're celibate, you're not paying attention to, like, oh, is my period coming on a regular basis? Am I tracking it? Am I knowing what my menstrual cycle is trying to tell me? Am I taking care of my vulva? Like, am I, like, checking that everything is okay, and that I'm taking care of my sexual health even if I'm not sexually active? Um, am I taking care of my appearance and how I feel and how I'm feeding myself? Sometimes we only manifest that care when there's someone outside of us to reflect it. But how do we reflect it for ourselves? Like, how am I really caring for myself? So that's kind of just what I'm imagining, but I don't know for sure.
right. Absolutely. And just, subhanallah, like everything, Allah created everything in its proper balance. Um, mashallah. I did want to just give some ending suggestions, some really practical tips. I know that you said one of them was pay attention to when you ovulate. That may be a good time to fast.
Hmm.
And I heard the steaming. How often would you recommend a celibate woman to steam?
At the minimum, we usually would recommend before and after the period is really helpful, but even on a weekly basis or a month,
Okay.
it depends on, or even once a month. I think a minimum would be once a month would be really helpful for just overall health and self care. It's like taking a warm bath. It's something that feels good to the body and is good for the body.
But
So
that doesn't
treating,
increase kind of your sex drive or your desire. I'm just wondering with
I guess
a
it
little bit.
depends. It could potentially, possibly.
Okay. So people have to be a little mindful of that if that
Mhm.
does become a
The
factor.
timing, though, so probably you would want to do that just after the period, for example, or you know or before the period. That would be a good time.
Okay. All
Never
right.
during the period. Never steam
Okay.
during the period. Mhm.
never steam during the period. Are
Mhm.
there foods or things that people should be mindful of
To avoid.
to avoid or
You're
to
saying?
intake? Yeah.
Yeah, there are some foods that have a reputation for boosting libido. So, just being vigilant. I don't think there are foods, I mean, generally, the foods that are good for libido are good for overall health, but there are certain supplements, certain herbs that tend to really show an effect. Like maca is kind of classic. Maca root is pretty classic for increasing libido. It has other benefits, but yeah, you might want to be vigilant about, like, oh, how much of that am I adding to my smoothie if I'm
Yeah.
celibate right now. Like, it does have other health benefits. Shatavari is an Ayurvedic herb that's also very well known for boosting libido. So, if you're a person who's into herbal supplements, be vigilant about how much and how often you're taking supplements, because usually supplements that are good for hormones in general may have like a libido boosting component. But like berries are good for libido, but like they're good for a ton of things. So I wouldn't say
Right.
don't eat berries.
Right, right, right. Okay, so Chantal, I also have to say, and I know we were conscious. One thing you said, and I thought about this throughout crafting this whole show, and you said you don't want to do anything that induces shame or
Mhm.
that isn't hopeful as it relates to this
Yeah.
conversation. Because just like the sister said, there's a lot of people that are single, definitely not by choice. But
Yeah.
I did want to address just really quickly there is a mindset still that some people are single by choice and that it
Mm.
doesn't really have an effect and it's cool and it's like, yeah, I don't want nobody. But I wanted to just still speak to the way Allah created things in its proper balance. Like the
Mhm.
recommendation is to marry.
Yeah.
And just from your lens and your expertise, can I just, why? Why is that something that we should be encouraged to participate in
Oh, wow. I
as it
mean,
relates to our sexual health?
okay, just as it relates to sexual health. I mean, it's a way that we can preserve our, it's an aspect of vitality, right? And being fully alive, like being having the full experience of liveliness in the body. And so obviously, there's correlations with living longer, with like reduced incidence of certain diseases or health challenges in the future on like a purely physiologic level. I mean, it's a really big broad question, but just on a physiologic level, like we said, it has its own, when it's a healthy, and that's the context.
When it's
If it's a
healthy.
healthy, safe union, loving union, it literally has the capacity to heal us. So lately,
Yeah.
I've been really sitting with this conversation around community as medicine. And so I was listening to a doctor, and he was saying that when we are in loving, connected relationships where we feel like we belong, and we feel genuinely connected, it literally turns on the healing markers. Like it
So
turns on
true.
healing in our cells. Like literally, it reduces inflammation, and it turns on healing and repair in the body. And
Mm,
when we are in relationships that are where we don't feel safe, where there is disconnect and abuse and harm, it turns on inflammation in the body, which leads to disease and aging over time,
wow,
right?
that is so
So
true.
so
Mm,
literally, I don't know if we fully actualize our potential to heal and be healed without that kind of deep connection and partnership. And that's just my opinion on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's whew, that's very true. Mashallah, that is very true. And I thank you for speaking towards that because the call is for us to just always come back in alignment. And inshallah, may Allah make it easy for any and all of us that are navigating this. Okay, Chantal, we have like a couple last questions. I
Yeah,
promise I'm
yeah.
gonna
I'm
jump.
good. I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good.
So
Alhamdulillah.
the question is around steaming. How do you steam, I guess, or should you steam with just water, or can you use something added to water?
I think just water is a good starting point. I can't really. There's a bit of nuance. So even though steaming is a very old tradition in many cultures, all of the inhabited continents have a history of steaming. What we do now as practitioners is we kind of codify how women should steam, and like we create protocols for women based on what their period is like, what their symptoms are
Okay.
like, and what they're trying to achieve. So I can't say yes, use this herb or that herb if I don't know what your period is like. But starting with just water is a great start. Like it's just an opportunity for you to really down regulate your nervous system,
Mhm.
be present with your body, and yeah, and do in the same way that you would do a facial, right? A facial is really good for your face,
Mhm.
right? It impacts your skin in a positive way, and it's kind of like a facial. It has the same effect. It's like a seat sauna, but not nearly as hot as when you think of like a sauna room. It's a gentle warm steam that feels good to the body, and whatever feels good to the body is going to help reduce stress, is going to help calm the nervous system, and also, increasing warmth to your vulva is going to have positive effects as well.
So if you are married and you are steaming, it does increase
It can.
sexual pleasure. It can. Is
Yeah.
that okay?
Yeah, prior to intercourse, especially like if you steam before intercourse, it's very possible because basically it's like I don't want to say defrosting, but just the idea that you're like increasing blood flow before arousal. So usually arousal is how blood flow is increased to, right, to the tissues, the vaginal tissues, the vulva, the clitoris. Usually arousal is how we start to see that engorgement and that rush of blood flow. But steaming is like it's like a fast track to increasing
Got it.
circulation. When you increase circulation, you also increase sensation and lubrication. And so when I actually work with clients who have painful intercourse or vaginismus, oftentimes I'll advise them, well, don't attempt anything until you've steamed first, to kind of give your body a chance to really prepare and be present before engaging.
That's sorry. Down a little bit. And I still
I,
no.
I think we disconnected. Sorry. Did
Yeah,
you hear?
back.
Okay. I hear you.
Okay, it's visually back.
It's frozen for me. I don't know if it is for anybody else.
So you can hear it's just because of an ice storm in Detroit, that connection. My connection.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just stay on the line. I can't. Let me see if I can see the questions to continue them. Hey, okay, I can see the comments now. Squat over the pot. Okay. Frozen and robotic sound is choppy. Pineapples are highly recommended. Wow, this chat is. I should have been here all this time. I didn't see all these things. Okay. Let me see if I can answer anything here. Salam alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right. How many girls still experience period shame? Very sad. How about emotional aspects of celibacy? Can you fall into depression? I think you have to be pretty vigilant about caring for yourself, right? Because unmarried doesn't mean uncared for or unloved. So I think that's really up to the individual to get really clear on, how are they going to express this self care and self love without a partner doting on them. Um, what else is coming up here? Other question. What about us for women that are postmenopause without periods? We addressed that one already. I'm
My
just
back,
picking up on.
Chantel.
Yes, I hear you now.
I'm sorry. We have
I'll
a
just.
horrible ice storm here, so it's
Oh,
affecting. It's
Allah
affecting things.
protect you all. My great
Um,
aunt told me when women get older, if you don't use it, you lose it. Is that true? Yep, that sounds right. When you get older, if you don't use it, you lose it. That makes sense to me. That your body does start to kind of wear away. Painful.
well, did you answer the pineapple question yet?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
That's right in that. That's okay. More cellular listening. Oh, okay. About tracking and extreme birth trauma. Oh, subhanallah. Can the steaming help us? Okay, we got there. Can contribute. Okay. All right. And then should you steam with just water? What is the process of steaming herbs in a pot? You steep over. Yep. You just sit over the pot. Not too hot. If you use your hand first, always put your hand first. And if it is too hot, then you just wait. It's supposed to feel soothing, not painful.
So
Um,
I think, Chantel, if I could just kind of fast track it, I think that the last question, based on where I heard the what is the process for steaming, but you just explained that. I think that last one is pineapples are highly recommended for men and women for tasty fluids. And they said, I don't know if they're being graphic. Did you want to answer that or did you want to leave that? I think that's the last one.
yeah, not really. I miss you too, Sadia. It's not so I've heard, it's not really a question. It's a commonly,
Believed.
it's really commonly believed, and so yeah, I don't think it's a question, but I guess that's for people to figure out.
Alhamdulillah.
I mean, pineapples are there's a ton of reasons to eat pineapples, so
Yeah.
hey.
Yeah, go for it. Okay, well, I wanted to just say thank you so much. This was so beneficial. Thank you to the audience members for really participating. Chantal, I want you to just share and drop with us how, if people want, it seems like people have a lot of questions. If they want to know more about the STEAM and if they want to know more about the workshops and the coaching and all that you offer, where can they find you and what do you offer?
Yeah, so everything that I'm doing, I'm very active on Instagram, which is Honored Womb, HONOREDWMB, no space or lines. And so I often, well, if I'm offering any classes or workshops, they'll be present there. I have a membership where we have live classes and grounding sessions and Q&A sessions because many women don't have spaces for these kinds of questions about pineapples and steaming and safety, so I like that we can have a private, intimate space in our membership. I do teach courses as well, and I do offer private consultations and coaching for women who are trying to explore alternative, natural, holistic ways to addressing either painful periods, hormonal chaos, or different challenges around their sexual health.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, okay, guys, so you heard that. Please reach out to her. Like I said, this was really mind blowing in many ways. I really appreciate it. And, the thing that I'll say is this: we really need to amplify and support people within our communities that can provide this information. We know, like, there's so many things we have shame around, and just the discomfort of going to some of the practitioners as a result of some of the advice, like you mentioned. Sometimes they'll just say, "Oh, just masturbate; they'll keep you
Mhm.
healthy." But we need to invest in our own, and so I really deeply appreciate you for your work. It's phenomenal, and I really appreciate just how you deliver the information here on this platform. So Jazakallah khairan, may Allah bless you and increase
Oh,
you with
you're
your work.
welcome. Thank you. Thank you as well. Thank you for holding this space, having these amazing conversations, and not being afraid to give a platform for us to, like Sister Malika's comment. I thought this was going to be uncomfortable, but it was extremely cozy and beneficial. And so, inshallah, that'll be, inshallah, the uncomfortable can still, we can lean in and still have fruitful, reverent, like I really think having these conversations in a sacred way is so important. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Alhamdulillah. Chantal, can you drop your website one more time?
honoredwomb.com.
Okay. Thank you so much. Honoredwomb.com, folks. Check her out, inshallah. Okay.
Mm.
Jazakallah khairan, guys. Thank you so much for another amazing podcast. I appreciate you, Sister Chantel. Thank you so much for our dope audience members. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.